Thanksgiving in Los Angeles had always carried a strange duality. It was supposed to be a holiday of warmth, of gratitude, of families putting their arguments aside in exchange for turkey, pie, and a facade of peace. But for the Logans, the Forresters, the Spencers, and anyone whose life had ever crossed paths with them, peace was rarely more than a pause between storms. And this year, the storm arrived long before the turkey had even cooled on the table. Brooke had spent the entire week convincing herself that this time would be different. She wanted, no, she needed, a holiday untouched by betrayal, heartbreak, or scandal. She needed a moment to breathe in the illusion of stability. Hope and Liam's renewed engagement promised a fresh start that felt fragile but sincere. Bill and Katie's reunion offered the comforting nostalgia of a family rediscovering its forgotten rhythm, and Will, once a boy caught between warring adults, now seemed to be on a brighter path. Brooke clung to these small triumphs as if they could insulate her home from the chaos that had defined their lives. She believed, desperately, that Thanksgiving could mark a turning point. Her house reflected that hope. The Logan home glowed with soft amber lights that she had strung across the mantel. Flowers in shades of orange and burgundy filled crystal vases. The long dining table was set with gold-rimmed plates and polished silverware. The scent of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and buttery rolls floated through the air. She had even place-name cards, something she hadn't done since Hope was a child, because she wanted today to feel intentional, thoughtful, safe. And for the first hour, it almost worked. Hope moved between the kitchen and living room with her usual quiet grace, her smile tentative but warm. Liam stayed close to her, protective in that familiar way he had always been, though there lingered a fragile nervousness in his movements, as if he feared any wrong step could break their newly mended bond. Katie arrived holding Will's hand, and Bill followed, slightly awkward but undeniably softened by the second chance he'd been given. Donna, buoyant and cheerful as always, floated through the house like a gentle breeze. Even Deacon, invited at Brooke's insistence for Beth's sake, kept his demeanor carefully respectful. Then there was Beth. Brooke could tell the child was hiding something long before dinner began. Beth was unusually fidgety, her excitement bordering on secretive tension. She clutched her phone as though it held something fragile, her gaze flicking toward the front door every few minutes. At first, Brooke assumed this was about Hope and Liam's engagement. Maybe Beth was planning a surprise speech or had crafted a drawing that she didn't want anyone to see yet. But when she overheard Beth quietly begging Hope if Grandpa Deacon could bring someone special, and when Hope insisted on knowing who, Brooke felt a small flutter of unease. Beth refused to reveal the name, only saying with unwavering sincerity, "They need a family today." Brooke dismissed it as childish empathy, the sort Beth often showed even when it wasn't safe. But unease began to stir like a faint shadow behind her thoughts. Still, she forced herself to push it down. Today was supposed to be calm, a step toward healing. She refused to let imagined fears take root. Dinner was served earlier than usual to accommodate everyone's schedules. They were just sitting down, Hope adjusting Beth's napkin, Bill cutting into the turkey with a measured confidence, Liam reaching for the mashed potatoes, when the doorbell rang. The chime cut through the pleasant murmurs like a blade. Brooke stiffened. Everyone else paused too. The timing felt wrong. Too deliberate, too pointed, like a moment scripted for tension. Deacon looked up abruptly, guilt flashing so quickly across his eyes that only Brooke noticed it. "Beth," Hope said gently, "sweetheart, did you invite one of your friends?" But Beth wasn't looking at her mother. She was staring at the door with an expression that combined innocence, hope, and something Brooke recognized instantly: secrecy. Before anyone could move, Beth slid off her chair and rushed across the living room toward the foyer. Hope called after her, but the child flung the door open with such determination that the entire table went silent. And there she stood, Sheila Carter. The room turned to stone. The woman's very presence warped the air, bending it into tension and dread. Her dark hair fell in soft waves. Her eyes gleamed with familiar calculation masked behind practiced vulnerability, and her smile, small, cautious, almost fragile, was enough to ignite every instinct of self-protection in the room. Brooke stood so fast her chair screeched across the floor. "Sheila." Brooke's voice carried a cold, slicing clarity. "Get out of my house." But Sheila didn't move. She looked down at Beth, who gazed up at her with unwavering sincerity, and then she slowly raised her hands as if to show she carried no threat. "Beth invited me." Noise exploded at once. Hope gasped, reaching for her daughter. Liam stood, face paling with disbelief. Bill muttered something under his breath sharp enough to cut steel. Katie grabbed Will instinctively. Donna pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Brooke felt something fracture inside her, a mixture of fury, betrayal, and terror warring all at once. Because this wasn't just an intruder at her door, it was an intruder invited by her granddaughter, the child she protected fiercely, the child who had no concept of the damage Sheila had done. Deacon was the last to rise. He didn't shout like Brooke. He didn't recoil like Liam. He didn't curse like Bill. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, as though absorbing a blow he had long feared but hoped would never come. When he opened them again, there was a weariness there that aged him instantly. "Beth," Deacon managed, voice thick. "You shouldn't have done this." "But she said she was lonely," Beth whispered. "And you said everyone deserves a chance." "I thought." Hope wrapped her arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "Sweetheart, Sheila isn't someone you can invite into our home." "She's dangerous," Liam added gently. "She's family to none of us," Katie finished, voice steadier but eyes dark with alarm. Sheila's expression flickered, her smile faltering just enough to reveal a flash of hurt or manipulation. With Sheila, it was impossible to distinguish the two. "I didn't come to cause trouble," Sheila said softly. "I didn't even plan to stay. I just wanted to see what a real Thanksgiving looked like." Brooke's fury sharpened into something colder, more dangerous. "You don't get to play innocent. Not here." Sheila stepped forward slightly, but Brooke's glare stopped her. "You heard her," Bill said, stepping beside Brooke. "This isn't your place." For a moment, the scene seemed poised to erupt into violence. Then Deacon moved, not toward Sheila, not toward Brooke, but inward, as if confronting a war within himself. His loyalties were tearing him apart. His daughter, the person he loved most, had unknowingly invited the woman who had shattered so many lives. And Sheila, the woman he couldn't fully detach from no matter how hard he tried, stood at the center of it all. "Deacon," Brooke said sharply, "tell her to leave." Hope watched her father with a kind of sorrowful desperation. She knew this wasn't simply about safety, it was about trust. It was about whether Deacon could prove, once and for all, which side of his life he truly belonged to. But before Deacon could answer, before Sheila could defend herself, before Brooke could unleash another word of fury, Deacon's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He didn't move. The buzzing stopped. Then Liam's phone rang. Then Katie's. Then Bill's. Then Hope's. All at once. Every device lit up. A simultaneous alert. A coordinated call. A shared emergency. Katie's was the first to connect. She placed the phone to her ear, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to horror in seconds. The blood drained from her face as she looked up, meeting the eyes of every person in the room. "It's Luna," she whispered. "There's been an incident in prison." Silence crushed the room. In a single instant, Thanksgiving was obliterated. The turkey grew cold. The candles flickered. The air, already taut with tension, solidified into dread. No one spoke. Not Hope, whose compassion stretched painfully between fear for Beth and shock for Luna. Not Liam, who recognized the name with a sinking unease. Not Bill, who knew what prison violence meant. Not Brooke, who felt the axis of her home shift beneath her feet. Even Sheila didn't move, her breath catching as though she sensed the collective shift. What happened? Hope finally managed. Katie swallowed, struggling to find words. "They're not telling me everything. But it's serious. Something happened inside Luna's unit. They're saying she might not make it." Another silence. This time heavier. as if the entire house inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Luna. The name itself was enough to conjure images: fragile strength, haunted eyes, troubled past, complicated connections. She was a reminder of the chaos that had woven itself deeply into every corner of their lives. Hope pressed a hand to her chest. Oh God, Beth, her earlier excitement replaced by fear, clutched her mother's sleeve. Is Luna hurt? No one answered. Brooke sank slowly into her chair, mind whirling. The room that had moments earlier felt like a battlefield now felt like the edge of a precipice. Deacon finally spoke, voice almost broken. We need to know what happened. But before anyone could decide to go, call back, or demand details, Katie's phone vibrated again with a follow-up message. Her hands trembled as she opened it. She blinked twice, as if unsure she had read it correctly. They're locking down the facility, she whispered. There was a riot, and Luna was caught in the middle. Donna gasped. Hope covered her mouth. Liam stiffened. Brooke felt a cold ripple flash through her. Thanksgiving wasn't simply disrupted. It had been swallowed whole by a new crisis. And in the center of the chaos, Sheila still stood in the doorway, half in, half out of their world, her presence distorting every instinct of safety, trust, and clarity. Will looked from adult to adult, his young face confused and frightened. Is Luna going to die? No one could lie to him. No one could tell him the truth either. The room had become a suspended moment, a breath caught between past sins and present consequences. And then, unbelievably, Sheila spoke again. Her voice was low, but steady, filled with a gravity none of them expected. If Luna's in trouble, you're going to want to hear what I know. The reaction was instantaneous. Brooke's fury reignited. Not now. Not ever. You don't get to exploit this. I'm not exploiting anything, Sheila said quietly. But you don't understand what's happening in that prison. I do. Sheila, Deacon warned. No, she said, eyes sharp with something that resembled sincerity, or perhaps desperation. You can hate me. You can throw me out. But right now, Luna's life may depend on whether you let me speak. Hope's voice trembled. What do you know? Sheila hesitated only for a moment, glancing at Deacon before stepping forward. Not into the house, but toward the edge of the doorway, as if crossing the boundary would seal her fate. There's someone inside that prison who has a reason to silence Luna, Sheila said. And this riot, it's not random. The room froze again. Brooke's heart slammed against her chest. Liam exchanged a haunted glance with Hope. Bill narrowed his eyes with the intuition of a man who had made enemies in every corner of the world. And Katie, still holding her phone tightly, whispered what everyone else feared to ask. Why would anyone want Luna dead? Sheila inhaled slowly, the weight of the truth settling heavy on her shoulders. Because, she began, Luna found out something she was never meant to know. A sharp, stunned silence followed. Even the candles seemed to hold their flames still. Sheila's gaze moved across every face in the room before she finished her sentence. And someone wants to make sure she never reveals it. The room filled with a coldness deeper than fear. It was the chilling knowledge that their quiet holiday had become the first move in a much darker game. And Luna might already be paying the price. RJ had never learned how to silence the echo of betrayal. It wasn't the kind of pain that arrived like a sudden wound. It was the slow-spreading kind, the sort that seeped into the bone and waited until quiet moments to claw its way back to the surface. Long after Luna's scandal had exploded, after the shouting died down and the apologies turned to dust, the shock remained in him like a bruise that refused to fade. He could function on the outside, show up at the office, sketch new concepts, pretend he was fine, but inside, something had collapsed. Every creative decision felt heavier. Every risk looked sharper. Every trust seemed dangerous. And yet it was the very sensation of danger, the rawness of having been blindsided, that made him reassess the world he thought he understood. Zend, in contrast, carried a different kind of wound. His wasn't heartbreak, it was slow erosion. For years he had maintained a respectful smile, congratulated RJ when Ridge praised him, reminded himself that being part of the Forrester family meant being patient, supportive, controlled. But disappointment had a way of piling up, and even dignity had limits. Every board meeting where his ideas were acknowledged only to be overshadowed by RJ's youthful momentum chipped away at his composure. Each time Ridge instinctively looked to RJ for the fresh perspective, Zend felt something twisting deeper. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the feeling of being perpetually half-visible, like a light blocked by someone else's shadow. And though he tried to suppress it, bitterness had been quietly shaping him, pushing him into a version of himself he never expected to become. The irony was that neither of them initially intended to seek the other. RJ kept his distance from most relatives because vulnerability made him reckless. Zend kept his distance because pride made him silent. But one late evening, when both stayed behind at the Forrester atelier long after everyone else had left, their private storms collided. It wasn't a heart-to-heart conversation, and it wasn't confession. It began with a single comment from RJ, murmured almost absent-mindedly as he stared at an unfinished sketch. "Forrester is becoming predictable." The words hung in the air like a forbidden truth. Zend, sharpening a pencil nearby, paused. He wasn't sure if he had misheard, or if this was some kind of emotional spillover from RJ's heartbreak. But when RJ didn't retract the statement, something unlocked inside him. "It is," Zend said quietly. "And it's been happening for a long time." The room felt different after that, less like a workspace and more like a pressure valve that had finally released. It was startling how quickly tension transformed into understanding. They didn't agree on everything, but for the first time, they recognized the same dissatisfaction in each other's voices. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't sabotage. It was hunger, creative hunger, artistic hunger, the ferocious need to push boundaries instead of being forever defined by the comfort of a legacy. Days later, their shared frustration turned into an idea. Weeks later, that idea became a secret project. And eventually, secrecy evolved into a partnership neither of them had ever expected. A brand new collection, unbranded by Forrester Creations, designed under total anonymity, free from family expectations, free from comparisons, free from the suffocating sense that every stitch needed to pay homage to Ridge or Eric. The idea felt dangerous. Liberating. Maybe both. They worked in RJ's garage studio, in Zend's apartment, in rented workspaces along the LA River, anywhere except the Forrester atelier. There was no corporate oversight, no legacy to live up to, no pressure to make something on brand. Instead, each session pulsed with experimentation. They mixed fabrics Ridge would have never approved, played with silhouettes Eric would have deemed too youthful, explored textures Thorne would have dismissed as commercially unstable. But beyond the artistic freedom, something deeper was happening. RJ rediscovered a version of himself that existed before Luna, someone who believed in risk, in instinct, in the thrill of unpredictability. Zend, too, felt something reawaken. The unapologetic ambition he used to have before years of politeness softened it. Still, a project needed more than creativity to become a moment. It needed someone who could turn a spark into a spotlight. That someone was Daphne. Daphne had always been drawn to stories that followed the cracks beneath glamorous surfaces. When RJ and Zend approached her with the proposal, an off-the-record collaboration, no Forrester signature, no past privilege, she didn't hesitate. She saw what they couldn't yet articulate. This wasn't just a new collection. It was a statement. A generational ripple. A story that would unsettle the fashion world because it wasn't supposed to exist. They launched the line quietly, under a new brand name that no one could trace back to them. They staged the debut in a renovated warehouse in downtown LA, as far removed from the Beverly Hills polish of Forrester Creations as possible. There were no gold chairs, no shimmering runways, no legacy to prop up the clothes. Instead, the warehouse was lit with stark white beams, exposing every detail with brutal clarity, forcing the designs to stand entirely on their own. And they did. The night of the launch felt like standing at the edge of an earthquake that had yet to rupture. The audience didn't clap, they reacted.
Gasps.
Whispers. Heads leaning to one another in confusion, curiosity, awe. Each model walked like the clothes were extensions of their pulse, and the line between fashion and statement art blurred. When the show ended, the applause was thunderous. Daphne knew in that moment that the fallout would be enormous. Within hours, fashion blogs lit up. By the next morning, global outlets ran features. And by afternoon, speculation consumed the industry. Who was behind this anonymous brand? How could first-time designers execute such bold technical vision? Why did the aesthetic feel hauntingly familiar? Reporters dissected the seams, the cuts, the color palettes. One article outright stated that the collection held the unmistakable fingerprints of Forrester talent, specifically Ridge's protégés. And then came the question no one in the Forrester family wanted to hear. Have the next generation Forresters abandoned Ridge and Eric's legacy? This wasn't merely gossip, it was accusation. If young designers were breaking away from Forrester creations, what did that imply about the relevance of the fashion house? What did it say about the leadership? About Ridge's direction? About Eric's final era? By evening, online discussions escalated further. Is Forrester Creations losing touch with the modern market? Has complacency replaced innovation? Is the iconic brand being quietly drained from the inside? Ridge read every headline. The more he read, the more something cold crawled up his spine. He recognized the designs before anyone else, recognized the unique blend of RJ's romantic minimalism and Zen's structured boldness. But recognition didn't breed pride. It bred fear. Not fear of competition. Fear of loss. Ridge had spent his life shaping Forrester Creations alongside his father. Every piece of the company carried echoes of Eric's philosophies: respect tradition, embrace beauty, honor craftsmanship. To Ridge, the house wasn't just a brand. It was legacy, family, identity. So when the world suggested that his own sons, one by blood, one by appointment of love, might be walking away from that legacy, something inside him cracked. It wasn't anger. It was the dread of losing the very thing he had spent his life building. But he wasn't the only one shaken. Eric, though older and slower, had moments of sharp clarity. When Donna showed him the headlines, his expression went still. For a man whose heart had always beat in rhythm with the sound of sewing machines and runway applause, the idea of Forrester Creations being left behind pierced him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Across the office, Brooke tried to keep calm, but even she felt the tremor. She knew RJ had been struggling emotionally, creatively, personally. She supported his healing, but she never expected his healing to manifest in a full-scale artistic rebellion. Hope, meanwhile, wrestled with conflicting feelings. She admired RJ's bravery. She admired Zen's drive. But she also knew the cost of defying family expectations. She knew how quickly ambition could fracture relationships. And then there was Thomas, silent, calculating, observing. He didn't react outwardly, but privately, he wondered if the next generation of Forresters had simply done what he had always wanted to do himself: break free from the suffocating weight of legacy. But amid all these reactions, Ridge faced the most impossible dilemma. He could confront them, demand they shut down the brand, remind them of loyalty, insist that creativity should serve the family empire. But doing that would destroy their trust, flatten their independence, and prove every headline right about Forrester being outdated and controlling. Or he could let them continue, allow them to test their wings outside the house, risking the possibility that their success would make Forrester Creations obsolete, risking the chance that the company's future might slip through his fingers. It wasn't simply a business decision. It was a paternal one. It was emotional, generational, existential. If he pulled them back, he would become the villain in their story, another gatekeeper refusing to let young designers change the world. But if he let them go, he might lose the world he had spent decades fighting to build. The fashion industry smelled blood. Investors whispered. Competitors watched. Reporters dug deeper. People wondered whether this anonymous brand represented the future, while Forrester Creations clung to the past. Ridge refused to believe that. He couldn't. He wouldn't. But even he knew that denial didn't solve problems. And somewhere across Los Angeles, while the world buzzed with speculation, RJ and Zen sat in a dimly lit studio, staring at the glowing screens showing headlines about their collection. Headlines they never imagined would erupt so explosively.